Ich darf Sie alle auch nochmal herzlich begrüßen im Namen der Deutschen Mozart-Gesellschaft und freue mich, dass Sie heute Morgen gekommen sind, um einige Neuigkeiten über den Augsburger Klavierbauer Johann Andreas Stein und auch weitere Verbindungen in der Zeit kennenzulernen. Und ich bin sehr dankbar, dass es uns gelungen ist, wirklich einige der schlechthin Kapazitäten auf dem Gebiet hier nach Augsburg zu bekommen. Und in allererster Linie darf ich begrüßen Mathieu Vion, der diese beiden wunderbaren Repliken gebaut hat von frühen Steinflügeln. Dann natürlich Christoph Clarke, der Doyen, sage ich mal, des großen Klavierbaus ist hier. Michael Latcham, der Forscher schlechthin in allem, was frühe Hammerflügel ist, und Johann Andreas Stein. Frau Silke Berdux vom Deutschen Museum, die Leiterin der Musiksammlung dort, die ebenfalls eben eine ausgewiesene Kapazität in Sachen früher Hammerflügelforschung ist. Und zuletzt natürlich auch meine lieben Kollegen Pierre, der heute auch ein bisschen mit noch etwas Fragen beantwortet zu den Instrumenten. Wir werden jetzt im ersten Teil zunächst mal 3 Vorträge hören und lassen dann die Diskussion offen für Fragen Ihrerseits. Wir können etwas ausprobieren, wir können relativ flexibel sozusagen zu den Instrumenten sprechen und dergleichen, auch Fragen an den Klavierbauer stellen und dergleichen. Ich habe hier, weil das Thema des zweiten Vortrags ist, das Notizbuch von Johann Andreas Stein. Das sind die Ausgabe der Universität Augsburg. Bitte klauen Sie es nicht, aber ich lasse es durch die Runde gehen. Ich habe es auf meinen Namen ausgeliehen. Sind leider sehr, sehr teuer, aber auch sehr, sehr schön gemachte Bände über das Faksimile dieser Notizbücher und auch informativ über den anderen Johann David Schiedmeier, auch ein Werkstattbuch eines Klavierbauers, der hier bei Stein gelernt hat. Das sind eben sehr, sehr spannende Dokumente, die Sie währenddessen ein bisschen anschauen können. Ich lasse es durch die Reihen gehen während dieser Vorträge. Dann darf ich begrüßen Frau Silke Berdux, die uns eine allgemeine Einführung geben wird.
Ja, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, stellen Sie sich vor, Sie gehen durch Augsburg und plötzlich steht Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart vor Ihnen. Das hätte Ihnen im Oktober 1777 leicht passieren können, als Mozart sich für 2 Wochen hier in der Stadt aufhielt. 21-jährig hatte er gerade seine Konzertmeisterstelle in Salzburg aufgegeben und befand sich mit seiner Mutter auf der Reise nach Mannheim und Paris, um neue Kontakte und vielleicht auch eine Stelle zu erreichen. Es war eine Reise, die über 1,5 Jahre dauern sollte, bis Januar 1779. Heute würden Sie ihn sicher fotografieren, vielleicht auch ein Selfie mit ihm machen, aber damals ging das natürlich noch nicht. Deshalb können wir nur vermuten, dass Mozart eine Perücke trug, vermutlich mit einem schönen Band, der den Zopf zusammenhielt, dazu vermutlich einen prachtvollen Rock und außergewöhnliche Schnallen. Er legte viel Wert auf sein Äußeres und die Suche nach besonderen Accessoires nimmt in seinen Briefen großen Raum ein. Wenn Sie ihm hier oder auf dem Ulrichsplatz begegneten, kam er sicher von Johann Andreas Stein, dem bekannten Orgel-, Cembalo- und Klavierbauer, der im Haus Nummer 10 wohnte und arbeitete und dem und dessen Instrumenten dieses kleine Festival gewidmet ist. Bevor meine Kollegen in die Details gehen und wir auch etwas hören werden, möchte ich Sie einleitend ein wenig mit Stein, Mozart und der damaligen Situation bekannt machen. Mozart war als Komponist bekannt, aber mehr noch vielleicht als Spieler von Tasteninstrumenten. Bereits als kleiner Junge war er so aufgetreten. Häufig musste er auf einem Kissen sitzen, damit er überhaupt die Tasten erreichen konnte. Und später lieferte er sich Wettspiele. Eine für uns heute eigenartige Form, die aber damals in der Zeit der Wunderkinder und der Zurschaustellung von Fertigkeiten und Wunder eine wichtige Form war. Und er spielte verschiedene Tasteninstrumente, auch während seines Aufenthalts in Augsburg 1777. Etwa in der Barfüßerkirche die Orgel von Stein und in einer Akademie einen Hammerflügel. Zitat: Als ich Herrn Stein sagte, ich möchte gern auf seiner Orgel spielen, denn die Orgel sei meine Passion, so verwunderte er sich groß und sagte: Was? Ein solcher Mann wie Sie, ein solch großer Klavierist, will auf einem Instrument spielen, wo kein Douceur und Expression, kein Piano noch Forte stattfindet, sondern immer gleich fortgeht. habe Stein gesagt, berichtet Mozart. Und damit sind wir auch schon mitten im Thema. Als Tastenspieler war Mozart natürlich an den Instrumenten von Stein äußerst interessiert, zumal die Familie bereits lange ein Klavichord von Stein besaß. Über den Besuch bei Stein berichtet seine Mutter Maria Anna an ihren Mann: Herr Stein gab sich alle Mühe und hat uns vieler Höflichkeit erwiesen. Wolfgang Amadé war offenbar hingerissen von den Instrumenten. Er schrieb nicht von Accessoires, sondern ganz detailliert über die Flügel, die er dort erlebt hatte. Und begann mit dem, was dem heutigen Vormittag auch den Titel gegeben hat. Nun muss ich gleich bei den steinischen Instrumenten anfangen. Und dann geht er in die Details. Ehe ich noch vom Stein seiner Arbeit etwas gesehen habe, waren mir die Spathschen Klaviere die liebsten, also die von Franz Josef Spath aus Regensburg. Nun muss ich aber den steinischen den Vorzug lassen, denn sie dämpfen noch viel besser als die Regensburger. Wenn ich stark anschlage, ich mag den Finger liegen lassen oder aufheben, so ist halt der Ton in dem Augenblick vorbei, da ich ihn hören ließ. Ich mag an die Clavis kommen, wie ich will, so wird der Ton immer gleich sein. Er wird nicht scheppern, er wird nicht stärker, nicht schwächer gehen oder gar ausbleiben. Mit einem Wort, es ist alles gleich. Seine Hämmerle, wenn man die Clavis anspielt, fallen in dem Augenblick, da sie an die Saiten hinaufspringen, wieder herab. Man mag den Clavis liegen lassen oder auslassen. Es folgen weitere instrumentenbauliche Details, deren Nennung hier zu weit führen würde. Man merkt, Mozart wusste, wovon er schrieb. Wer war aber dieser Johann Andreas Stein, von dessen Instrumenten Mozart so angetan war? Er war 1751 nach Augsburg gekommen, wo er als Organist und Instrumenten- und Orgelbauer, wie das damals hieß, tätig war. Diese Kombination kommt uns heute eigenartig vor, damals war sie aber üblich. Eine Spezialisierung in Orgel, Cembalo und Klavierbau, wie wir sie heute kennen, kam erst später. Stein baute Tasteninstrumente, und zwar sehr verschiedene. Orgeln, Klavichorde, Cembali, dann auch Hammerklaviere und Instrumente, die solche kombinierten. Er war ein äußerst kreativer Kopf, ständig auf der Suche nach neuen Lösungen für seine musikalischen Vorstellungen. So erfand er ein Polytono-Clavichordium, das gezupfte und angeschlagene Saiten kombinierte. Eine Melodika mit Orgelpfeifen, große Vis-à-vis-Instrumente, die auf der einen Seite Cembali und mit Hammerflügeln verbanden, ein Klaviorganum, eine Saitenharmonika, wo Saiten angeschlagen und angezupft wurden. Diese Kreativität war herausragend, wie sich auch in dem Notizbuch zeigt, das Michael Latcham später vorstellen wird und das er herausgegeben hat. Die Vielfalt der Klänge und die technischen Lösungen sind aber auch typisch für die damalige Zeit, die nach neuen Klängen und Möglichkeiten suchte, nach neuen Möglichkeiten des Ausdrucks, der Klangfarben und der Musik. Der Hammerflügel war um 1700 von Cristofori in Florenz erfunden worden. Ein Cembalo, mit dem man laut und leise spielen konnte, hieß es. Aber er hatte sich, anders als man heute manchmal meint, nicht sofort durchgesetzt. Vielmehr war dies äußerst langsam geschehen. Zahlreiche Instrumentenbauer loteten in den nächsten Jahrzehnten Möglichkeiten zwischen Klavichord, Cembalo, Hammerflügel und Kombinationsinstrumenten aus. Es gab Cembali, bei denen die Saiten mit verschiedenen Materialien angezupft wurden. Instrumente mit Hämmern, mit zahlreichen Veränderungen, die die Klangfarben ins Große steigerten. Instrumente mit gezupften Saiten, auch mit vielen Veränderungen. Ein Tangentenflügel, bei dem die Saiten mit hölzernen Tangenten angeschlagen wurden. Es gab Kombinationsinstrumente wie die von Stein oder die von Joseph Merlin aus London. Und es gab Hammerklaviere wie etwa die von Silbermann, wie Kerstin Schwarz sie nachbaut, um nur einige wenige zu nennen. Michael Latcham hat diese Instrumente detailliert dargestellt und auch die Steins detailliert untersucht und ist dabei, so ein Titel seines neuesten Buches, Towards a New History of the Piano gekommen, also einen anderen Blick auf diese Instrumente. Bereits früher hat er darauf hingewiesen, dass diese Instrumente, die uns heute so unterschiedlich scheinen, wie Klavichord, vor allem Cembalo und Klavier, unser Klavier, eigentlich damals gar nicht so verschieden waren, dass sie ähnlich klangen. das, was man heute und auch bei diesen Konzerten gut erleben kann, denke ich. Und damit ist eben ein neuer Blick auch auf diese Übergangszeit und diese besondere Zeit mit diesen vielen kreativen Entwicklungen möglich. Und Stein war ein großer Teil in diesen. Er war nicht nur kreativ und handwerklich heraussagend, sondern auch sehr geschäftstüchtig. Er reiste nach Paris und nach Wien, um dort seine Instrumente vorzuführen und zu verkaufen. Und auch damit hatte er Erfolg. Eine wichtige Voraussetzung für die Durchsetzung von Innovationen. Nicht nur in Augsburg hatte er zahlreiche Kunden, sondern auch in Wien, Salzburg, München und Würzburg. Zu seinen Kunden gehörten Musiker, Bankiers, Adelige und die Fugger. Und er hatte wesentlichen Einfluss auf die weitere Entwicklung. Der Bericht Mozarts lässt ja schon erahnen, dass es auch für Mozart ein großes Erlebnis und eine neue Erfahrung gewesen sein muss. Für die Hammerflügel hatte Stein eine spezielle Mechanik entwickelt, die ein fein nuanciertes Spiel ermöglichte, wie wir auch gestern schon gehört haben und weiter hören werden. Um 1780 hatte er, so Michael Latcham, das Instrument wohl erreicht, das seinen Vorstellungen entsprach. Der älteste Flügel, der diese Mechanik besitzt, stammt aus diesem Jahr. Ob das Instrument, das Mozart 3 Jahre früher spielte, diese Mechanik bereits hatte, wissen wir nicht. In Augsburg kam Mozart 1777 nicht nur mit seiner Cousine, dem Bäsle, mit dem er die bekannten Briefe wechselte, die so lange gar nicht in das hehre Mozart-Bild passten, zusammen, sondern er lernte auch die Tochter von Johann Andreas Stein kennen, die damals 8-jährige Nanette, und deren Todesjahr sich übrigens in diesem Jahr zum 190. Mal jährt. Sie spielte Kunden die Instrumente ihres Vaters vor. Mozart war von ihr angetan, sah aber auch Verbesserungspotenzial und engagierte sich dafür, indem er lange Gespräche mit dem Vater führte. Sie kann werden, sie hat Genie, aber auf diese Art wird sie nichts, schrieb er an seinen Vater. Und Herr Stein und ich haben gewiss 2 Stunden miteinander über diesen Punkt gesprochen. Ich habe ihn aber schon ziemlich bekehrt. Er fragt mich jetzt in allen um Rat, schrieb er am 24. Oktober an seinen Vater. Das Stammbuch, das Nanette führte und das auch in einer Neuedition vorliegt, gibt einen wunderbaren Eindruck von den zahlreichen Gästen, die ins Haus Stein kamen. Oder sollte man sagen, die dorthin pilgerten. 1787 war auch Ludwig van Beethoven unter den Gästen, 1789 der Musikschriftsteller Reichard, um nur 2 zu nennen. Mozart fand die Instrumente Steins nicht nur in Augsburg. 1774 beim Wettstreit mit Beke in München, Christoph Hammer hat den gestern schon erwähnt, war dies auf einem Stein. Und später, an Heiligabend 1781, als kurz nachdem Mozart nach Wien gefahren war, am Wiener Hof als besonderer Höhepunkt des Besuchs der russischen Adeligen ein Wettspiel zwischen Mozart und Clementi geboten wurde, hatte Mozart vorausschauend, wie auch bei anderen Gelegenheiten, den Steinflügel der Gräfin Thun ausgeliehen. Wir haben gestern das Stück gehört, was der Gräfin Thun gewidmet war. Während Clementi auf einem Instrument des Hofs spielte, das verstimmt war und bei dem 3 Tasten stecken blieben. Keine guten Voraussetzungen für Clementi. Als Mozart Anfang 1782 einen eigenen Flügel in Wien erwarb, wählte er einen des dort ansässigen Anton Walter. Dieses Instrument besaß ebenfalls eine Prellmechanik, zu der Stein die Grundlage gelegt hatte. Zu dieser Zeit schrieb er aber auch an seinen Vater, diese möge für die Baronin Waldstätten ein Tafelklavier von Matthias Christian Baumann aus Zweibrücken besorgen. Christopher Clarke wird uns über Baumann berichten. Mozart war also gut informiert über die Lage. Er behielt seinen Flügel bis zu seinem Tod 1791 und schleppte ihn inklusive eines großen Pedalklaviers zu allen seinen Konzerten mit, auch über Treppen. Dies war notwendig, da zu dieser Zeit nur an wenigen Stellen Hammerklaviere vorhanden waren. Als Mozart 1791 starb, war der Hammerflügel verbreitet, noch nicht überall etabliert. 1794 heißt es, in Konzerten lässt sich durchaus nicht mehr damit, dem Cembalo, auftreten und nur einige Anhänger des Altertums nehmen das Cembalo noch gegen das Fortepiano in Schutz. Nur im Theater werde zur Orchesterleitung noch das Cembalo gespielt. Es folgte eine rasche Entwicklung mit allen paar Jahren neue Modelle und Klänge. Auch wenn diese Instrumente noch sehr unterschiedlich waren, war dies der Beginn einer Normierung und einer Einengung auf das Fortepiano. Die kreativen Zeiten, die Michael Latcham so wunderbar erforscht und dargestellt hat, waren nicht ganz vorbei, aber näherten sich dem Ende. An der weiteren Entwicklung hatten die Kinder Steins, Nanette und Matthäus und sein Schwiegersohn Andreas Streicher erheblichen Anteil. Nanette führte die Werkstatt in den letzten Lebensjahren ihres Vaters und nach dessen Tod 1792 weiter. 1794 verlegte sie nach Wien und dort stellten ihre Instrumente neben den Walters, wie es in Quellen heißt, eine von 2 Hauptrichtungen dar. Sie war eine der wenigen Frauen, die einen Betrieb führte und die Instrumente auch so signierte. Ab 1802 Nanette Streicher née Stein. Also sie nimmt den berühmten Namen des Vaters noch mit. Das Ehepaar Streicher errichtete in Wien einen eigenen Konzertsaal und sie hatten auch Anteil an der Gründung der Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde. So kann man Augsburg als Stadt betrachten, in der der Siegeszug des Klaviers, des vielleicht einflussreichsten Instrument überhaupt, zentrale Impulse erhielt. Das kleine Festival führte uns in diese spannende Zeit, in der viel im Umbruch war, auf der Suche nach neuen Klängen, technischen und musikalischen Möglichkeiten, einer Suche, in der Augsburg eine besondere Rolle spielte. Vielen Dank.
So happiness doesn't always come wing-shaped. And as you can see, Mozart was also very keen on instruments which we call square pianos, which are rectangular in form. And about 40, 50 years ago, the name of the maker in Zweibrücken was discovered, and it was Christian Baumann. So this is one from the same year in which Mozart wrote. It's in a private collection in Switzerland. And because Baumann, well, in fact, Zweibrücken had very, very close connections with France. The Duke, Christian, was very close to the French royal family and had a townhouse in Paris. Sometimes Baumann actually signed his labels in France, and this one was probably found near Dijon. And here it is. It's a very beautiful instrument, quite small, and 5 octaves with, on the left here, you can see a hand lever. That raises the bass dampers, and there's another one on the right to raise the treble dampers, so they're split. This is that instrument before restoration. So you can see this very characteristic brown, black-stained bridge here. You can see note names written all along there. In fact, they're stamped with a hot iron. That's very characteristic of Baumann. Here you can see these keys are carved at the back. They're rounded. And you can see there is a hammer, and next to it is a damper. So we'll see the next one. That's what they look like close to. The heads of the hammers have these little cork tips with no leather at all, but cork, which is a little bit soft. So the sound is actually quite rounded, but still very, very definite. And the dampers are these things here with lead weights on them. So when the key's raised, the damper comes up here, and this little pad hits a stretched wire, which is covered with this silk chenille. And so the damper trips downwards and disengages from the string. We'll go back one, maybe. No, it's not there, sorry. This fork here, actually, there are 2 frames which lift the dampers, treble and bass, and they pivot on that fork in the middle. Back-guided keys here, and they're up up at the top, you can see where the two damper frames. And here, they're in place. So you can see here is the pivot. There's the bar that rests under the tails of the dampers, and that's lifted by the curved fork, curved lever, which is in the keywell. Dampers are tipped with velvet and leather. And here there is a buff stop, which is made of also with silk velvet and leather, and that's operated with this lever here. And some of Baumann's pianos had that and some didn't, but they all had the damper arrangement. Here's underneath the soundboard. This is not the same Baumann, it's an earlier one, but you can see this very complicated system. So the bridge is running here. You can see these are little nails in the bridge which have been bent over as he glued the bridge on with a hot iron. And then all these ribs, these ones here are cut out, so the soundboard is free under them. And then all these ones all around, and these smaller ones just to adjust the sound a little bit. Very complicated, and he remained faithful to that system right up until about 1810 or so. So, a couple of years ago, there's a collector called Pierre who owned this instrument here, and he had some others in for repair, and they looked very like Baumann, but they clearly weren't by him. So one day he took the soundboard out and found this signature inside. So that's Johann Georg Geib in Frankenthal, and he was best known as an organ builder, so there are still several organs by him which exist. I forgot to say that Baumann was also, for a while, he was the court organ builder in Zweibrücken, and then he gave up just to make pianos. So that gave a name to this other Baumann-like construction. And in fact, both Baumann and Geib were journeymen together at an organ builder called Stumm. They were brothers, and they were very important organ builders in that region. And I believe that, in fact, they worked together on the design for these pianos. So here is a Geib soundboard. You can see much simplified. So just 3 ribs here. Here. So 3 main ribs there, and then some little cleats there. And decoratively much simpler. So here, this cutout here with Geib is very simple. With Baumann, it's much more complicated, very complex decorative curve. No stain on the bridge, so the bridge is just wood-colored. Here, there's a raised platform covering the rest plank, which Baumann doesn't have. And instead of having the branded-on note names, he writes them just with a pen here. Keys are very similar, except that Geib has 4 lines on the keys, and Baumann always has 2. But you can see the action is very, very similar. Here's the lifter for the dampers. There are the dampers, and you can just see the hammers there. This is another instrument which came up for sale in Paris last year. And although it has the name of a French maker, Zimmermann, on the name board, in fact, that was added by an antique dealer not very long ago, I think. And I was able to identify it from all the things that we've been talking about with Geib. So I'm almost certain it's a Geib instrument. You can see this lovely marquetry decoration, which looks very English. That story carries on with Geib's younger brother, Johann Lorenz, who moved to London in the early 1780s and made an absolute fortune there, making square pianos as well. He also patented Cristofori's action, which was a bit cheeky of him, but he made a lot of money with it, and eventually went to America and founded a firm there, which carried on until about 1900. So maybe this is a kind of a wink to his brother in London. And here's the lid. And now we come to a grand piano, which is made by, it's signed Johannes Kilianus Mercken in Paris. Mercken moved to Paris in 1767, and I think from lots and lots of details that, in fact, he must have worked for Baumann before going to Paris, and I think maybe even had the case of this piano made by one of Baumann's cabinet makers, because the style of the case is very, very similar. Here is the action, which is totally weird. In the bass, it has these hollow hammers with a Cristofori type action, so it's very like Jean-Ry Silbermann's pianos. And in the treble, it has these hammers, so it's prellmechanic. So here you can see the bar which the tails of the hammers bump on. Here are the tail pads. Here are the capstan. And the heads are completely solid and kind of zigzag. This is obviously a later modification. I think it was probably because in Paris, players really found the Silbermann action much too heavy for their taste. They were used to very, very lightly quilled harpsichords, and they just didn't like pushing down on the keys so much. So they must have asked Mercken to modify the action in the treble, and he made prellmechanic. But we can see here's one of the capstan, and it's very, very tall. And that means that if the keys get a teeny bit wobbly, a bit of wear in them, then the top of the capsule wags around a lot, and the hammers probably hit the strings next door. So he made them alternate in length, so they wouldn't hit each other. One of the things that Baumann did, and which Geib did, is to use silk floss for the pivot here. So these are little silk threads which are pulled through. It's very efficient, it's completely quiet, and it lasts forever. And all the Geib's instruments, all Baumann's instruments had those. And because Baumann was extremely successful, there are actually identified 21 Baumann instruments, of which 9 are signed and 11 aren't. And I've identified 4 Geibs, of which 1 is signed, and his nephew, there are 2 signed instruments, who also used these silk pivots, by the way. The trouble is with, as we saw, the Baumann is signed on a paper label, and it's a little bit like when you go to your old aunt, and she said, "Oh dear, would you get some jam from the larder, please?" And you see all these rows of jam jars with paper labels on, and some of them have fallen off, and you see Damson 19, and some of the labels have gone altogether, and some of them still have their labels. Well, it's exactly the same problem with all these square pianos, because they all had paper labels. This design was actually very popular, and there were at least 10 people who followed that. So Mercken, who we've talked about, there's Thibaut Eppel, who was in Alsace, and then other ones are Schiffmann, Matthias Goltz. There's one in Munich, which is I've identified as being made in Frankfurt am Main, which is probably by Johann Jakob Pfeil. There's another one in France by Johannes Betz, which is very, very, he actually was the cabinet maker for Pfeil, and they're very, very similar. Michael Bogner, that's a claviorganon. And there are two completely anonymous ones. So these Gute Kleines Pianoforte were actually, it was a design that was very popular, and which died out partly because of the French Revolutionary Wars, which of course were ravaging the whole of that part of Germany, as well as the rest of Europe. And also because somehow they never seemed to manage to get beyond 5 octaves. There aren't any bigger than that. There's going up to G for 2 of them, but that's all. And they sort of fizzled out. And big city makers like Erard or others start to take over the whole market, in fact. So that's the story of what I've identified as the Pfalz, or the Palatinate school of building, of which Baumann and Geib were the founders. Thank you.
I have a little remark on Silke's thing, because of the importance given to this, ehe ich die steinischen Instrumente gesehen habe. And then the lift it up. And then the second quote, was du die große Klavierist, wants to play on an organ on an instrument where there is no douceur, no expression, no forte, no piano, but always goes on the same. These two statements, and also the rest of the letter from Mozart to his father on the 17th of October 1777, and the Spätischen Instrumente, which he wrote about, I think quite a lot of it would have been dictated to him by Stein. There are so many technical details in that letter, and so much of it seems to be aimed at Spath, who had been Stein's teacher only for a few months, but Stein seems to have made a point of trying to forget that he was with Spath. And so when he says all these things about that it nicht schäben and nicht something else, I don't think Mozart would have been interested in those things. He wouldn't have been interested in Christopher's wonderful beginning of his lecture with all the technical details. He would have said, oh yes, but can I play it, please? And he would have been interested in how it sounded, how it worked for him. And not that when I touch the knee lever, when I let go, it damps immediately. He would have been interested, like all of musicians, in how it plays, and not in these technicalities. And the idea of hanging up the soundboard in the snow and the wind, which is also reported by Mozart in that letter, is nonsense. And that he sets in a knife to make a hole in the soundboard and then glues it together again, and then he knows it will never break again. It's nonsense. Surely it's nonsense. And I think all of this was dictated to him by Stein to tell his dad. There was a lot of toing and froing between people to convince them to buy their instruments. And the other remark that I would like to see your organ because the organ is my passion. Mozart's father told Mozart before he went, When you see Stein, give him some compliments about his organ, because he's very proud of it. So he goes and he says, may I play your organ? Because the organ is my favorite. You have to take them with a pinch of salt. These famous words. And I think the clue of the whole thing is, how did it play? What was it like for Mozart? He doesn't really tell you. But he certainly liked the instrument of Gräfin Thun in Vienna. And he acted as an agent to sell Stein's instruments. He was in the business. Anyway, how do I turn this on? You do, and then I go forwards. There he is. Well, that's supposed to be him. I'm not so sure it is. Who knows? Does anybody know why it's called Stein? I think it's very likely. He was, after all, the organ maker in Augsburg at the time. He was not considered so much as a piano maker at that time or harpsichord maker, but there he is, the portrait that is in the Mozart house here, and there's a copy of it in the archives of the city archives. Johann Andreas Stein was born on the 6th of May, 1728, in Heidelsheim, near Karlsruhe, and died on the 29th of February, 1792, in Augsburg. His initial training as an organ builder was given him by his father, Johann Georg Stein. On the 1st of August 1748, the day Johann Andreas left home on his journeyman's travels, he bought a notebook in Karlsruhe. The notebook includes poems, sketches, anecdotes, descriptions of his journeys, both as a journeyman and later as an instrument maker in Augsburg. Brief references to pianos of other makers, including Bartolomeo Cristofori, note the name, Pandelon, and Franz Jakob Spath. This, he says, you can see Ratisbonne, Regensburg, the invention, and he gives some measurements of it there. Those will be sums about doing some work or something, but it's on the right, I would like you to look at. This is typical of his notebook. It's all mixed up. You can't see one thing, and then you turn the page and you're maybe 20 years later with something completely different, like how much they ate when they were building an organ. In Strasbourg, Stein worked during his first week on the 3 keyboards for the organ that Johann Andreas Silbermann was making for the new church in the city. Stein described his work on the keyboards in great detail. This and the next page. And gave the disposition for the organ in the notebook. The organ was finished in November 1714. Oh, that's not the right one. I'll see if I can find it. No. There it is. That's the organ. After Stein had left Silbermann, there's Johann Andreas Silbermann. Johann Andreas Silbermann was the son of Andreas Silbermann, who was the older brother of Gottfried Silbermann, the very famous organ maker. But Andreas Silbermann, who taught Gottfried, was also a famous famous organ maker, and so was Johann Andreas. And this is one of his most famous organs. Beautiful. And there it is again, after we had done our business. 1743, is it? Yes. It was destroyed by fire. No, that's not us, this one. This was the Franco-Prussian War in August 1870. Stein also assisted with the organ Johann Andreas Silbermann finished for Sulz in 1750. Although Stein was a journeyman organ maker, He was apparently not one of those who installed the organs, but rather one of the journeymen who stayed at the workshop to make the pipes, bellows, keyboards, action parts, and more. They would make all the parts in the workshop and then take them wherever they needed to go, sometimes a long way, sometimes with 6 carts drawn by horses. Some of the entries in the notebook to do with the keyboard construction and pipe work were certainly made by Stein as a journeyman at the Silbermann workshop. Now I have to find, yes, there it is. So, for instance, for this church, St. Thomas's in Strasbourg, and that organ is still there. The use of a small brass pin as a pivot at the distal end of each key lever, mentioned or drawn on 4 pages. There it is. It's a suspended action, it's called. There's a pin at the left-hand side, and you press down here, and the rest is the key frame with all the measurements on it, with his, in this case, beautiful handwriting, Die Klavier, and so on. And so that little pin goes down through the wood of the frame, through the key, and down below. And the key can wobble on that pin. So this particular way of making an action is called a French action. Is that right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. He learned from Silbermann, and he taught it to Spath, I think. And the particular French he used also, as well as this type of French action, and the French he used for other pages, indicate that these entries probably stem from Stein's time in Strasbourg. Other matters to do with organ building, for instance, might have been learned at the workshop of Franz Jakob Spath in Regensburg. Stein was a journeyman there from October 49 until January 1750. Yes, one entry about measuring relative frequencies using a monochord suggests that Spath may have taught Stein some of the theory of intervals and temperament, resulting in more than 30 pages on such subjects, some of them misunderstood and none of them of much use to a practical organ maker. Stein appears to have had a predilection for the erudite, however, shown not only in his interest in the complex theories of frequency ratios, but also in his use of French and Latin. In the notebook, the entries that appear to be from Stein's time in Strasbourg and that refer to musical instruments only concern organs. No mention is made of pianos. There is also no evidence to show that the 4 Silbermann brothers made any Hammerflügel during the time in which Stein was with them. Yes, this is Johann Andreas Silbermann, the eldest of the 4 brothers, the sons of Andreas Silbermann, the older brother of Gottfried Silbermann. This wonderful picture. It's in Strasbourg. Photo by Pierre. Stein thus seems unlikely to have seen a Hammerflügel while at work in the Strasbourg workshop. Nonetheless, some features of the piano of his 1777 vis-à-vis harpsichord piano, now in Verona, suggest that Stein was influenced either by the Hammerflügel of Gottfried Silbermann, made by the uncle of the 4 Silbermann brothers, Gottfried Silbermann in Freiburg, Saxony, or perhaps by those made by Johann Heinrich, there's Johann Heinrich, in Strasbourg. Johann Heinrich's pianos were well known in Paris already in the 1760s, and Stein may have seen them on his visits to the Silbermann workshop in Strasbourg in October 1758 on his way to Paris, or on his way back in January 1759. Alternatively, Stein may have seen Silbermann pianos in Paris, either on his first visit there or on the second visit in 1773. There's the one that's in Berlin of Johann Heinrich. Measurements of a Silbermann harpsichord are given on page 160 of Stein's notebook, and other measurements of a Silbermann soundboard on page 282, with an illustrative sketch on page 283, all supporting the idea that Stein had the opportunity of examining a Silbermann instrument at close quarters. There you are, his drawing. It says it went to, or that it was something to do with von Fries in Vienna. Von Fries, things are known about him. There you see pergament for the soundboard. This could be a Silbermann thing. And you see up there Silbermannische or Silbermannisch Verbindung. And this is all in the, it's all a bit enigmatic. You don't really know quite, is this him looking? Well, you can see that this is looking at a soundboard from above. And so how did he see a soundboard from above? Or did he just draw it like that? Or did he peer inside and then draw what he saw as if it was from above? Don't know. Don't know whether he worked on it or just saw it and drew it. One of the nice pages. Actually, no, I can't, you can't rotate this. Doesn't matter. Imagine this rotated that way. Where's the pointer? Okay. Here is a little piano action. And here is another one. And here, if you turn it upside down, is another one. In between, no, here's the second one there. And it seems to be operated by the nice man who's taking his hat off in greetings. And it seems to be connected with the woman who has no bikini on. And somewhere down here, it may have been one owner of the notebook who scrubbed out with this vicious pencil what was actually going on there. But it's an interesting page with these three actions. None of them have any relationship, I don't think, to his piano action found in these instruments. And two of them have a relationship to the other completely different piano action, hammer action, which is in the vis-a-vis in Verona. There are more naughty pages in the notebook, but I leave that to you when you have bought your copy for 500 euros. The primitive actions shown in the sketches certainly bear no relation to the sophisticated action used by Johann Heinrich Silbermann. On the other hand, Spath, who is reported to have made a piano for the Elector of Bonn in 1751, could feasibly have been making pianos in late 1749, so that Stein, who was with Spath from October 49 until January 50, could have been inspired by hammer instruments that Spath might have already been making when Stein was with him. The sketch of a soundboard by Spath, which I showed you before, tends to corroborate this idea, that is, that Spath influenced Stein. Later, the various announcements made regarding their inventions suggest that Spath and Stein, once master and journeyman, became rivals. If Stein was indebted to Spath, he never appears to have acknowledged it. On the contrary, in his arguments to the authorities for building a new organ for the Barfuße Kirche, Stein claimed to have made all the pipes for Spath's organ in St. Oswald's Kirche in Regensburg, finished in 1750, and to have voiced all those pipes as well. I hope. Yes, there it is. There is evidence to show that Stein influenced Spart with regard to making the keyboards, but a claim to have made all the pipes for the organ at St. Oswald's may have been partly fanciful, especially considering the very short time that Stein was with Spart and the fact that Stein left Regensburg already in January 1750. This organ was not completed until 1750. Stein left Strasbourg on the 9th of June 1749 and arrived in Regensburg on the 16th of October the same year. In the intervening 4 months, he mentioned numerous towns and cities through which he passed, some of the women he admired on the way, and only one piece of work he did in Königsbach, repairing an organ. Yes. Working on organs would not have been so easy for a single journeyman. Even to tune would have meant requesting the services of 2 other persons, the organ blower and someone to play the keys while Stein tuned. Also in Königsbach, Stein mentioned how the girls had flirted with him, although he noted that he could not trust them because he could not see into their hearts. During this period, Stein appears to have written much of his poetry. At least 19 out of some 60 pages devoted to verse appear to have had to do with love, the plight of unmarried mothers, and the delights of the journeyman's life. One poem expresses a sense of piety in relation to nature and her creator, and another takes the form of a lengthy dialogue between Stein and a personification of sleep. With regard to dating the notebook pages to do with Stein's travels, there are inconsistencies that indicate that Stein was in 2 places at once. Furthermore, in his list of arguments for building the organ for the Barfüßerkirche, he claimed that he was called by his father home from Regensburg to help build an organ in Gochsheim. Stein certainly did not go home directly, if indeed he was called home, from Regensburg. First he went to Nuremberg, taking his time, apparently thinking of settling there, and then on to Augsburg, where he started to build up his organ-making practice before returning home. The help he gave his father may not have been much. He is not mentioned in the church records at Gochsheim at all. Usually they put quite a detailed report of who was there and who did what when they repaired the organs, and you can get all these pieces of paper from the relative places. Stein left his father to go to Augsburg on the 12th of July, 1751. On returning then to Augsburg, he appears to have immediately set to work building an organ for the poorhouse and continued where he had left off when he set off to his father, building up his clientele in Augsburg of churches for whom he repaired and tuned organs, both Catholic and evangelical. The list, Stein was evangelical. The list Stein drew up of clients for whom he had made 30 stringed keyboard instruments since 1750, he wrote, indicates that he was building harpsichords and pianos, probably of different sizes and styles, in the period between 1750 and sometime before 1777. During the same period, however, he built his magnificent organ in the Barfüßerkirche. There it is in the etching made after the drawing that he made. This never happened. He put it in, and even 10 years later, he still claimed he was going to fill it in with pipes. But the third keyboard was there for this part of the organ, but he never did it. He built also a smaller organ for the church of St. Thekla in Weldon. Oh yes, there it is. That's the organ in the Barfüßerkirche. It's That's the end of the church. That end of the church is no longer there, and it's somewhere under there. That was after the Second World War bombing. This is the organ in St. Thecla, south from here, commissioned by Fugger, one of the Fuggers. And another one for the Heiligkreuzkirche here in Augsburg. The two, oops, it's too early. The two pedal, beg your pardon, the two, this is later and this is later. And actually all the innards have been, it's always the same with organs, more or less, always the same. They've been rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt. And they always say they claim to have made, all the Steinmeier and all these people, they claim to have made all the new pipes themselves, but actually they did use the old ones. They were terribly expensive, these tin pipes. So, now you've seen it already after the war, that you can see here's the arch on which the organ was built. Also, Second World War. You can see the beautiful Gothic church turned into a Baroque church in the normal manner with some capitals and so on. And part of that Baroque making of the churches often included having a nice organ made. At the time of building these organs that you've just seen, more or less, he built his polytono clavicordium, an instrument combining a large harpsichord and a Hammerflügel, announced in 1769, and a small expressive melody organ he called the melodica. In the melodica you could press harder on the key or softer on the key and get a louder or softer sound. And but you can only play one note at once, and it was 3.5 octaves, and you could put it on top of your piano or on top of a table, and it's a bit of a mystery how it worked, but he did make them because they are described. Concerts on them are described. But of these activities, that is of building this organ in the Heiligkreuzkirche, Catholic, and the melodica, the polytonic clavichord, are not mentioned in the notebook. It's very partial, the notebook. Many of the sketches in the notebook could be construed as ideas for the decoration of the Barfüßer organ, or perhaps the organ Stein made for the Heiligkreuzkirche, or indeed for any other organ, including the one in Weldon. Some of the repairs to organs carried out in Augsburg are mentioned, and the list of clients on page 238 and 239 show that he was building stringed keyboard instruments at the time. And that list is interesting because there are pretty pricey instruments, a whole category of them, some very pricey ones, maybe combination, and some very cheap ones, 75 for a little one. So was it a little one like the Baumann's? I expect so. But none of those instruments exist. None of those instruments on that list exist any longer. I think the last date in the notebook is 1777. Well, that's the date of the vis-a-vis. That one maybe is mentioned in the notebook, but none of these later ones. Nothing about their actions is mentioned in the notebook. One of the clients should be singled out here. Benedikt Adam, Freiherr Liebert von Liebenhofen. There he is, the man who built this palace. He was the most important of the Augsburg merchant bankers, many of them interrelated, who were clients of Stein. In 1733, Liebert's father, the jeweler and silver merchant Johann Adam Liebert, came from Biberach an der Riss, some 60 miles to the southwest of Augsburg. He built up a considerable business in silver and exchange in Augsburg. In 1727, he married Maria Elisabeth Meyer, daughter of Benedict Meyer and Maria Katharina Hossenstell. In 1763, his son Benedict Adam Liebert was accepted as a patrician and made a nobleman with the title von Liebenhofen. In 1770, he was made a Freiherr or Baron. His magnificent city palace, later called the Schätzler Palais, was his palace. It was his head office. The building of the palace started in 1765. At the inauguration in April 1770, Liebert was host to the 14-year-old Princess Maria Antonia, daughter of Empress Maria Theresa. Maria Antonia had already been married by proxy in Vienna to the Dauphin, the future Louis XVI. The Habsburgs and the French Bourbons had decided to make friends and settle the case by marrying Maria Antonia to the 15-year-old Dauphin. Maria Antonia was duly parceled off to France by coach to become the Dauphin Marie Antoinette. On her journey from Vienna to Paris, the one perhaps happy occasion for her was the ball that took place in this hall. In 1758, Benedict Adam married Katharina Barbara de Leer, the daughter of Jacob Gabriel de Leer. And the daughter of Jacob Gabriel de Leer and Maria Barbara de Leer, née Ruprecht, Frau von Liebert, as she thus became, and she is mentioned on page 21 recto in the notebook of Johann David Schiedmeier, when he tuned for her when he was a journeyman with Stein. The Lieberts had 3 daughters, Elisabeth Jacobina, Maria Anna, and Regina Barbara. The youngest, Regina Barbara, was a pupil of Nanette Streicher, Stein's daughter. In 1778, Elisabeth Jacobina, the eldest daughter, married Paul von Rath, whose family were goldsmiths and jewelers from Lindau in the Bodensee. They had moved here to Augsburg in the second half of the 17th century. In 1793, Maria Anna married Johann Lorenz Schätzler, later to become one of Augsburg's most distinguished bankers. Schätzler inherited this palace, hence its name. According to Stein's list, Herr Liebert, who built this palais, was a good flautist, bought a FP, a fortepiano, maybe a square piano for Stein for 75 florins, and later on in the list, another FP for him for 200 florins, perhaps a Hammerflügel. At least 18 of the 30 clients on Stein's list bought harpsichords. The time of the notebook was one of transition for Stein, during which he not only changed from being an organ maker to become a piano maker, but also one in which he changed from making harpsichords and experimenting with pianos to concentrating on pianos alone. His desire to find a truly expressive instrument, so clearly set down in print in his description of the Melodica in 1772, together with the change in musical taste at the time towards a more immediately expressive language, must have inspired him to use his inventive spirit to move away from those 2 instruments, the harpsichord and the organ, at which the player's touch itself has little influence on the sound. The only tangible evidence for the type of hammer action that Stein used in his Hammerflügel during the period of the notebook, that is, up to and including the year 1777, is found in the vis-a-vis harpsichord piano, now in Verona at the Accademia Philharmonica. This has a harpsichord at that end, 3 manuals. On the lower manual, you can play the piano, which is at the other end with 1 manual. You can also, on that lower manual, play the harpsichord as well. you can couple the two instruments together. The second manual plays all four of the harpsichord registers. That's a 16-foot and 3 8-foots, a real German disposition. And on the top manual, you can play just one of the 8-foots. So there's a lot of different things you can do. The invention of the vis-a-vis appears to have been the subject of a sketch in the notebook. There at the top you see the vis-a-vis, seen from above. Underneath you see the crisscross of trackers. If you think this instrument with another one just the same here, if you want to connect that bottom key to the bottom key of this one, you've got to go diagonally across to here. Similarly for the top key, you've got to go from there to there. So there's a crisscross, a fan-like pattern, somebody described it as. There you see up below, and underneath at the bottom you see one of the connecting things between the two actions. And it is just like that in real life. And then there is the fan-like pattern in reality. You see there the trackers connecting. So you have there the drawing of what became the reality. I've always felt, it's a very personal thing, but I always felt that it was left to me to see that connection. I was sitting underneath the piano, taking that photo, and I suddenly thought, hey, that's the drawing in the notebook. And it was left to me to find it. You can imagine the combinations that were possible on that instrument with all the connecting things of the keyboards, piano and harpsichord with 4 different registers, all the different combinations. And there's a description of the polytonic clavichord which had the same disposition. It had a piano and the 4 same 3 8-foots and a 16-foot on the harpsichord, and you could combine them all together, and it's described as follows. The fortepiano imparts to the harpsichord a most agreeable crescendo and decrescendo, such that one believes that the harpsichord possesses this quality of itself, even though it originates in the fortepiano. At the same time, the harpsichord gives the fortepiano instrument, when played without dampers, a soft pleasantness, swirling from one level of the affects to another, even in distant keys, without upsetting the ear. If you heard the concert last night, they sometimes played the pianos with the dampers lifted, even though it was changing the harmony. By combining the 2 instruments in one, Stein gave the harpsichord what it missed: expressive power through touch. The 1777 vis-a-vis also has a buff stop for one of the 8-foot harpsichord stops, a moderator for the piano, knee levers at both ends for lifting the piano dampers all at once, and as well a harp or buff stop must have been there for one of the 8-foots. The harpsichord has much in his power. At the end of the description of the polytonic clavichord, it was written, one can easily understand from this that by the selective use of the 4 upper stops, that's the harpsichord stops, as well as through the choice of the 3 keyboards, through swapping the hands, and through the damped and not damped fortepiano instrument, very many registrations can be made on this newly invented polytonal clavichordium. But a special art is to play a melody using the soft 16-foot sound of the harpsichord coupled alone with the piano. So his idea of playing a solo with the 16-foot harpsichord stop and the piano together. Completely unknown for us. A combination that you would think was ridiculous, perhaps. Taking the bass, that's the accompaniment, on one of the other keyboards. That must have been the upper keyboard, the harpsichord. So you have a harpsichord in the left hand, playing a melody in the right hand of the 16-foot harpsichord stop, and together with the piano. The 1777 vis-a-vis shows that Stein was still searching for means of making the harpsichord expressive. The addition of a piano action to the harpsichord was a way to make the harpsichord capable of dynamic expression through the use of the player's touch. While the melodica was intended to make the organ expressive, the vis-a-vis was a means of making the harpsichord expressive. Now the difficult bit. Sorry. The hammer action in the 1777 vis-a-vis is not Stein's hammer action, but rather an action in which the hammers pivot in a hammer rail and the escapement jacks are mounted on the keys. The key levers pivot at their distal ends, the technique Stein learnt from Silbermann. The hammer rises up with the momentum it gathers from the player and it strikes the string. Meanwhile, the escapement jack returns to rest position. In other words, although Stein did have an escapement mechanism in this piano, the one of the 1777 vis-a-vis, that action was not his German action, but rather what is known in German as a Zungenmechanik. This action fits best as the subject of the improvements to piano actions. Yes, I think so. Stein listed on pages 248 and 249, and appears to be the most recent action Stein employed or who had thought about when the notebook was still in use. The piano in the vis-a-vis has solid wooden hammers with no covering, for instance, of leather or cloth, a 16-foot and 3 8-foot stops, all with quill. Organ-like in its conception, with its numerous stops, it is capable of considerable volume. Even in the Hammerflügel Stein might have made in 1777, simpler in conception, that is, not combined with a harpsichord, but nonetheless equipped with the type of escapement action found in the vis-a-vis, with bare wooden hammers, with knee levers for lifting the dampers, and probably with a moderator, the degree of expressivity of which the instrument would have been capable would probably not have been sufficiently refined for Stein. There is, however, no evidence for any other type of action in the pianos that Mozart saw at Stein's in 1777, or indeed in the 3 pianos on which Stein, Demmler, and Mozart played at Mozart's Akademie during the same visit by Mozart to Augsburg in 1777. In other words, the action in these pianos, it could be that Stein had not invented them when that concert was given on the 3 pianos. It could be that they had an action like in the vis-a-vis. I'm not saying they definitely did, but I'm saying there is no evidence that pianos like this were used for that concert. There is only evidence that they might have had the action, which is in the 1777 vis-a-vis, with bare hammers, with an escapement action, as Mozart says in his letter, and perhaps with a moderator, bare wooden hammers, and a completely different sound concept to what these wonderful instruments have. That's also not to say that they did later play that concert again with 3 of these pianos. It's perfectly reasonable. There's only a gap of the oldest instrument with Stein's action as found in these pianos is 1780. It's only 3 years later, but it's possible that in 1777 they didn't have this action. There's no evidence for it. So, the oldest surviving instrument by Stein with his Zungenmechanik, the famous German action, is his 1780 Hammerflügel, privately owned near Innsbruck. Big castle. That instrument does not have its original hammers. They may have been bare wooden hammers or have had a thin leather covering. The instrument has an optional moderator. It had the round hollow hammers, I'm pretty sure. You can see from the way the action has been modified that the keys at the back have been rather like this thing. They've been cut off so that they go lower, so that for the experts here, so the beak of the hammer still slips underneath the escapement thing at the back. And if it was up there, you would have to have the little round hollow hammers. It's almost the same as the action in the 1781 claviorgan, but with tall, very Walter-like hammers on it. So they had to lower the keys to get the beaks under the escapement balls. So this instrument is the oldest instrument by Stein with his German hammer action, and has with nothing to create expression except for the player's touch, a set of light wooden hammers, each one perhaps with a covering of soft leather, and knee levers for disengaging all the dampers at once while playing, and still in this instrument a moderator, as also in, that's a Pianozug in German. It brings cloth or leather, and I think in this case, and in Stein's claviorganum, which combines a piano with an organ underneath, and a single stop organ, the moderator, the Pianozug, is made of cloth. His daughter used leather. But after this one, the claviorganum, the moderator disappears, and all you are left with are the hammers with a little leather covering, and knee levers for lifting the dampers, and your touch, and that's what in these instruments. By 1780 then, that's with this instrument, incidentally it comes off its stand. It's the so-called French standing. You can lift the instrument off its stand. And although quite a lot of the stand is probably not original, it never was otherwise. And did it have an organ underneath instead? No, it didn't. Pretty certain. There's no evidence for it. At first you think it did. And you see the yoke, the Kämpfer, that's added later. So by 1780, when he made this instrument, Stein's search for an expressive keyboard instrument appears to have reached its goal. After 1780, he only made a few minor changes to the design of his pianos. But by the time Stein started to make Hammerflügel with his German action, his notebook was full. Last page, a tiny bit. Supported by other documents of the period, the notebook relays some of aspects of Stein's life and work. Glimpses of a man are given who had a zest for life, an appreciation of other people, and a sensitivity towards them. He had pleasure in his appearance, an admiration of beauty, both in people and in nature, and confidence in his own talents, yet not without a certain bravura in his claims for his achievements. All this is at the surface. Beneath, visible perhaps in some of the sketches in the notebook, but above all stated in the description of the melodica, Stein was an inventor who was looking for an instrument capable of the expression that belongs only to the human voice. The notebook covers the period of this search from when he left home in 1748 until about 1777, the year of his invention of the vis-a-vis, but stops just short of the end to Stein's quest, the invention of his German action. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for this elaborate presentation. Alles, was wir hier heute haben, werden wir auch mit Genehmigung natürlich der Beteiligten dann auch online stellen, sodass man das noch genauer nachhören kann, vielleicht auch die Lecture-Papiere dazu eben noch präsentieren und veröffentlichen. Jetzt kommen wir zu den eigentlichen Instrumenten. Mathieu Vion hat hier diese beiden Kopien gebaut und möchte uns dazu noch etwas sagen. Da alle meine Bekannten, die vom Französischen ins Deutsche übersetzen können, im Augenblick nicht in Augsburg sind, sollte sich jemand bereit finden, dass er vom Französischen ins Deutsche übersetzen kann, bitte gerne. Ansonsten werden wir auf Englisch übersetzen. Das Ganze noch einmal für alle, die nicht Französisch verstehen. Ja? Aber ich glaube, dann machen wir das so.
Le projet de construction de restitution de ces deux instruments est venu d'un musicien qui a en sa position... Slow, ok. Donc la demande première était la restitution d'un instrument original de 1783 qui est en possession d'un musicien.
So the project came at the instigation of a musician who owned the original of this 1783 piano.
Il y a eu une grande discussion au départ pour savoir s'il fallait restaurer l'instrument, ce qui était possible, puisque c'est un des instruments de Stein dans des collections privées qui est dans un des meilleurs états.
So there was a big discussion at the beginning whether to restore the original, because it was actually one of the few Stein pianos in private hands that was in good condition, or to make a facsimile.
Après, nous êtes emparés du travail de Michael Latcham, qui depuis des années a créé une contextualisation autour de ce facteur et un catalogage précis des instruments.
So Mathieu's work was based very largely on Michael Latcham's work in describing and cataloguing the work of Stein.
Et on s'est aperçu que c'était un des seuls instruments aussi qui n'avait pas été sur-restauré.
And it was one of the few surviving examples that hadn't been over-restored.
Donc il y a une réalité, plus le facteur est talentueux, je ne sais pas si je le suis, mais plus le facteur est talentueux, plus il va effacer les traces de ce des interventions qu'il va faire, et plus la lecture de ce qui était original sera compliquée pour les générations futures.
So the problem is that the more talented the restorer who works on an old instrument, the more they impose their own ideas, which kind of messes things up for the future.
Donc il a été décidé de faire une copie. À cela s'est adjoint la Haute École de musique de Genève.
So it was decided that a copy would be made, and the Haute École de musique in Geneva sponsored the program.
Qui nous a inclus dans un module de recherche et qui nous a aidés financièrement et qui a organisé la visite de 4 instruments faits par Stein en 1783.
So they actually gathered several experts together, committee, and sent us, I was one of them as well, and we were sent to look at 4 instruments of 1783 by Stein in different parts of the world.
Et ensuite, ils ont demandé une seconde copie.
And then they asked for a second copy to be made.
Donc, comme en travaillant en amont, avant de copier réellement l'instrument, je me suis beaucoup inspiré en fait du travail de Michael sur son attribution des instruments. L'idée de ce que j'en ai compris n'est pas de vouloir à tout prix de prouver qu'un instrument est de Stein, mais simplement de faire un travail par comparaison, par concomitance, et de dire qu'est-ce qui dans cet instrument me permet de dire que c'est un Stein.
So, in the elaboration of the copy, Mathieu based his decisions on Michael Latcham's work. So he didn't only take into account the instruments that are absolutely certainly Stein's, but also the ones which are very probably Stein. And he made a collation of all the information of these instruments to arrive at his final plan.
Et donc l'idée, bien sûr, pour nous très importante, c'est de ne pas avoir je me répète, mais d'idées préconçues sur ce qu'est cet instrument de Stein, le considérer comme un en soi dans une époque de la vie de Stein, le copier le plus minutieusement possible, et que le son apparaisse par lui-même, par le fait de copier le plus précisément, en ayant par concomitance une comparaison possible pour chaque détail.
So in doing this, he took into account all the possibilities of contemporary instruments by Stein, not concentrating on any one of them, but trying to make an overview of them, and by actually using the elements that were discovered in all this to produce the sound rather than aiming for a sound in itself. So he let the research actually guide every step of the way.
Donc là, c'est l'instrument de 1783.
This is the original, 1783.
La mécanique dans les aigus.
Treble action.
On voit bien les marteaux en bois rond, couverts de peau.
So round, it's actually barberry wood hollow hammers with a small, thin covering of leather.
La même chose dans les basses.
Same thing in the bass.
Là, c'était pour montrer tout dans notre travail vraiment d'atelier, hein, pas que dans le travail de préalable, mais tous les jours, en fait, pour chacune des pièces, on a utilisé le catalogage de Michael en faisant des comparaisons pour chacun des éléments.
So for everyday workshop guidance, Mathieu made this chart, which is based on Michael's research, and shows every single element in its different states in various instruments by Stein.
Donc c'était bien sûr assez incroyable de pouvoir avoir 4 instruments de la même année par le même facteur que l'on puisse comparer. C'est rarissime en fait.
So it was a real privilege to be able to compare 4 instruments by the same maker made in the same year.
Donc là c'est la suite du catalogage. Donc, voilà, là, les 4 instruments que nous sommes allés voir. Et donc on avait une équipe avec un musicien, Pierre, qui était chargé de la recherche à la Haute École de musique de Genève, avec Christoph pour la facture, avec Michael pour l'organologie et avec Jean-Claude Bateau du Musée de la musique.
So the sort of core team consisted of musicians, so Pierre, Mathieu, of course, Michael Latcham as an organologist, me as a sort of factotum hanger-on, and Jean-Claude Bateau of the Musée de la musique in Paris.
En dehors des discussions qu'on pouvait avoir et du regard de chacun, il fallait qu'on ramène à l'atelier pour l'interprétation et pour la construction des relevés de cotation en prise directe.
So what we brought back from each expedition was obviously everybody's impression of the various elements in the instrument, and also exact measurements and photographic evidence.
Alors, le travail photographique il y avait 2 parties dans ce travail. Il y avait un premier travail de prendre des photos très précises pouvant être utilisées pour de la prise de cote par photogrammétrie.
So one of the photographic campaigns was to take very exact photographs which could be used for photogrammetry later on to determine measurements.
Et l'autre partie était un regard de facteur en se disant de quoi aurais-je besoin quand je vais construire l'instrument comme vision de chaque partie de l'instrument.
So the other wing of this research was, from a builder's point of view, what do you need in terms of materials and techniques to produce this particular part of the instrument.
Voilà, donc là c'est l'instrument c'est Boston, oui. De Boston.
This is one Boston,
Leipzig,
Leipzig,
qui est en fait un instrument plus tardif, mais qui m'a beaucoup aidé dans l'analyse des garnitures de mécanique.
So, the one in Leipzig is actually later, but it furnished a lot of information about, for example, hammer coverings.
Là, l'instrument de Trondheim en Norvège.
Trondheim in Norway.
Et le vis-à-vis de Naples.
And the Naples vis-à-vis. The other vis-à-vis.
Donc on va passer, je vais maintenant décrire un peu tout ce qui est la construction en donnant quelques éléments.
So this is he's now going to describe the construction.
Donc on avait à notre disposition donc, deux choses, le travail de relevé des autres instruments et l'instrument original pour lequel nous a permis d'ôter la table d'harmonie, ce qui était...
So in addition to the information from all the other instruments, the original that Mathieu based his copies on, he was able to take the soundboard out.
Ça, c'est vraiment incroyable. Donc, pour toute la partie de la caisse, on peut travailler en prise directe de cotation avec assez peu d'interprétation. Il y a juste un mouvement dans tous les instruments, surtout ceux de Stein, dans les aigus ici, où la caisse se bride.
So Mathieu was able to actually have the original right next to him, so he could take direct measurements and understand all the assembly of the pieces directly with the instrument under his eyes, and to also understand a little bit the defects of this design, where the cheek cocks up, and as you can see, the leg is actually a tiny bit off the ground.
Pour la partie de dessin, en fait, on travaille déjà sur ordinateur, ce qui permet juste de pouvoir changer les objets, les modifier très très facilement et en garder la trace dans plusieurs dessins.
So he actually drew it with computer, which allowed him to modify certain parameters, but in keeping a trace of every single stage.
Pour tout ce qui est le plan de cordage et la division du cordage, je me suis basé sur le travail de Paul Poletti, qui nous a amené à penser la division d'un instrument, non pas en division de note par note, mais en division de modules. Le grand module de l'entièreté du plan de corde et des modules d'octave.
So in the layout of the string layout, Mathieu based his actions on Paul Poletti's researches, which showed that there were modules in which there was several modules. So you have the module of the whole instrument, and then sub-modules with divisions in them.
Comme un plan est uniquement en fait un langage entre les personnes, et dans l'atelier, j'ai refait ce que faisaient la plupart des gens avant. Donc après avoir fait le plan sur un ordinateur, on fait un plan sur une planche de bois qui ne bouge pas, ça s'appelle une épure. Et c'est le plus simple des langages entre celui qui a conçu le plan et les ouvriers.
So Mathieu did then what he feels that was certainly done in the past. So from the original drawing, which was on the computer, he then prepared a pattern on a thin piece of wood, plywood, where the whole instrument, all its essential bits, were drawn out, and that was there in the workshop for constant reference by people working on the instrument.
Donc là, on voit bien la caisse qui est entièrement en sapin, avec les trois renforts intérieurs, la masse, peut-être ça marche ou pas?
Oui, c'est le petit bouton rouge. So,
voilà les trois renforts ici.
So the whole inside is in spruce.
La masse.
Three cross braces, the belly rail.
La grande planche ici qui vient de l'éclisse courbe.
So what we call the A-frame, which goes from the tail to the belly rail.
Et la partie des aigus ici qui est rajoutée, qui est assemblée avec le reste.
And then the treble, which is just filled in with that small length of structure.
On verra tout au long que ce soit pour la charpente, pour le plan de cordage, pour la table. Il y a un soin particulier, une idée en tout cas, qui est portée pour la partie aiguë, ici, là.
So, in the construction, there's actually the treble construction, which is sort of the most critical one.
Donc là, c'est la caisse une fois assemblée.
So this is
la copie.
The first copy, it's the assembled case.
C'était très intéressant pour nous de garder exactement les épaisseurs de bois qu'avait utilisé Stein, notamment l'épaisseur des plaquages.
So Mathieu and co followed all the various thicknesses of wood, including that of the veneer.
D'habitude, les plaquages font entre 1 mm et 2 mm d'épais, et là, Stein utilisait des plaquages qui font entre 2,5 et 3,5 mm, ce qui est le double.
So usually veneer is around 1 millimeter thick, and so it was Mathieu found that Stein was using stuff between 2.5 and 3.5 millimeters thick, so a lot thicker.
Et en fait, pour l'éclisse courbe, par exemple, l'éclisse devient extrêmement solide et nerveuse.
So that, especially for the bent side, that makes the case walls very solid and very stiff.
Parce que le fil du bois est croisé 4 fois au lieu d'être croisé que 2 fois.
So the grain direction of the wood is actually crossed 4 times and not just 3.
Je ne sais pas si Stein l'avait pensé en tant que tel ou simplement il a utilisé ça parce qu'il avait ça à sa disposition, mais le résultat est le même de toute façon.
So Mathieu isn't sure that Stein actually did it purposefully like that, but the result is the same in any case.
Donc là, c'est le travail sur la table d'harmonie avec le relevé de table.
So this is the original soundboard.
On voit bien la ligne directrice avec donc les 6 petites barres.
So you see the 6 small bars, ribs, I should say.
Une barre dans les aigus ici.
And then one in the diagonal, one in the opposite sense in the treble.
Et une très grosse barre qui est en parallèle du chevalet.
And then a big fat rib parallel to the bridge and over most of its length.
Sur le côté gauche ici, qui correspond à la partie non sonnante des cordes. Ouais, c'est ici.
But yeah, Mathieu says that corresponds to the bit that doesn't vibrate with the strings.
Yeah.
Okay.
On va voir sur le plan.
Okay. Well, he said we'll see on the plan. Okay. Find that.
En fait, ça crée un changement de force, le fait que toutes ces parties qui sont fortement amincies.
So they're very thinned down, so it makes a kind of a lever.
Et ça crée un changement de force dans la table d'harmonie.
So it actually alters the direction of action of force in the soundboard.
Et ça donne plus de force à cette grosse barre qui vient qui vient soutenir le chevalet.
So it actually kind of brings the vibrations to the long rib, which is right next to the bridge.
C'est la vue de dessus avec le chevalet et les barres de table par en dessous.
So I think you can see the bridge in light green and then the ribs in yellow.
On voit bien ce qu'il a voulu faire dans les graves ici. La grande barre vient soutenir l'extrême base du chevalet et ensuite est en parallèle de la partie droite du chevalet.
So in the base, the bridge is sitting on the counter bridge, or whatever you want to call it, and the rest of the time it's just very, very close to it.
Et dans les aigus, une petite barre qui est très fine et qui vient en tangente par rapport à la partie courbe.
And then in the treble, there's this very thin rib which is tangential to the bridge and actually crosses at 2 points.
Donc la table est évidemment collée sur tout le pourtour de l'instrument et sur la masse jusqu'à ici.
So the soundboard is actually glued all the way around, except in the treble beyond the counter bridge.
Ce qui correspond exactement au moment où on va passer de 2 à 3 cordes.
And that coincides exactly with the passage between 2 strings per note and 3 strings per note in the treble.
Et très vite, le moment où il n'y aura plus de contrepointe.
And there's no counterpenning in the treble, so double penning in the treble. Yeah.
Là, c'était une photo que je trouvais intéressante parce qu'on voit bien l'idée générale, en fait, par le dessous de la table d'harmonie avec cette grosse barre. Ici, qui est en parallèle du côté et avec toutes ces barres en éventail.
So you can see very clearly the relationship between the thin ribs in the right-hand side of the soundboard and the larger ones, which are actually continuous with the smaller ones on the left.
On voit bien aussi l'évidement qu'il a fait de la structure dans les aigus et la liberté qu'il donne à la table au même endroit.
So you can see how the frame has been scooped out in the treble to allow and control the vibrating area of the soundboard in the treble.
Là, on voit la contrainte que crée le collage des barres de table sur la table. On voit bien le bombé naturel, en fait, ici.
So here you can see the crown on the soundboard, which is because before you glue the ribs, you actually shrink the soundboard down, glue the ribs on. Soundboard then expands again and produces this natural curve.
Là, on va passer à la mécanique, donc.
So now the action.
Donc là, c'est dans l'instrument original, pour certains peut-être qui ne savent pas de façon générale le fonctionnement de la mécanique de Stein. Donc là, le marteau est au repos.
So this is the original, and here you can see the hammer at rest.
On voit qu'on est très très près du sommier.
So it's very close to the edge of the rest plank.
Là, on commence à soulever, c'est ce qu'on appelle la garde, donc il n'y a pas le marteau, et l'arrière du marteau n'est pas encore en contact avec l'échappement. C'est libre.
So this is you could call the foretouch. So there's a little bit of Schnabelluft, it's the space between the hammer beak and the underneath of the escapement pull. So actually, when you press the key, at first nothing happens. It just brings the end of the hammer, the beak, underneath the escapement pull. And now it's starting to
Ensuite, le marteau monte.
Up we go, more.
We go. Et il vient toucher la corde.
And here it's just kissing the strings.
Là, c'est intéressant aussi de bien comprendre que souvent on pense que le marteau vient toucher le rond en son milieu dans le repos, mais pas du tout. Il vient le toucher un peu en décalé à cause de la rotation ici, là.
So here you can see also that it's actually not the top of the hammer that's going to touch the strings. It's actually slightly to one side because of the arc of the hammer shank.
Donc voilà, il aurait touché, détail, il a retombé.
And now it's falling back again.
Voilà.
Under its own weight.
Là, je pourrais pas tout détailler, mais ce qui était je vais juste vous montrer un peu le principe de la décision, des décisions qu'on a prises. Mais ce qui était très intéressant, c'est que chez Stein, les marteaux, on va essayer de trouver voilà, ici. Les marteaux sont encastrés dans les tiges.
So the hammerheads are actually housed into the end of the hammer shanks.
Donc ça peut, d'habitude, dans beaucoup d'instruments, on peut bouger les têtes et c'est ce qu'on fait à la fin de tous les choix de réglage préalables.
So in most pianos with this sort of action, where you actually glue the hammer on can be at a different distance along the hammer shank. So you can actually, once you've done all the first adjustments of the action, the last thing you do is to glue the hammer shanks, the hammer heads, on in a straight line. But this isn't the case here.
Et là, comme cette longueur est donnée, elle va empêcher un certain nombre de dérives dans les choix de réglage.
And because the position of the hammerhead is actually determined in advance, that actually limits the choice of how you set up the action.
Comme on va le voir, les têtes de marteau, qui sont rondes avec une perce au milieu, n'ont pas le même diamètre extérieur.
So, as we're going to see, the diameter of the rings that form the hammerheads is not constant.
Et donc, Stein, pour corriger s'il avait fait les encoches ici, toujours au même endroit, les marteaux dans les basses se seraient décalés vers l'avant de l'instrument.
So, if he has to ensure that the bass hammerheads are in the correct position, so they're not shifting with respect to the proper line.
Et en fait, parfois j'étais souvent étonné ou piégé par la facture de Stein où tout semble assez simple, mais il y a souvent beaucoup de subtilité. Là, par exemple, il a décalé sa ligne d'encastrage pour que tous les marteaux soient alignés sur l'avant.
So there are lots of things that Mathieu came up against, which sort of looked simple on the outside, but actually were very sophisticated. And one of them was this shifting of the position of the bottom of the hammerhead where it met the shank to take account of the different diameters.
Donc là, c'était pour les. Ouais, là pour les, on a fait donc la comparaison des têtes de marteau.
So these are different, the hammerheads from different steins.
Comme une étude a été faite à Trondheim pour qualifier le bois dans lequel ont été faites ces têtes.
And so in Trondheim, they'd actually analyzed the wood of the heads.
Et c'est en épine vinette.
And so it's in barberry wood.
En fait, dans les livres du 18e de tournage du bois, on dit que l'épine vinette est particulièrement utilisée pour le tournage.
And in 18th century treatises, it's quite often mentioned that barberry wood is particularly good for turning.
Donc ces têtes sont de plus. La perce des têtes est toujours la même du bas jusqu'en haut de l'instrument.
So the hole in the middle of the hammerheads is constant from bass to treble.
Et plus on va dans les basses, plus le diamètre extérieur est important ou vice-versa.
So the further you go into the bass, the thicker the walls of the hammerhead, and vice versa for the treble.
Une autre question s'est posée, c'est le repos des marteaux. Donc vous voyez ici, cette petite pyramide en bois recouverte de 2 épaisseurs de peau chamoisée.
So the next thing was actually the height of the hammer rests. So in the second line from the bottom, you can see the blocks vertical blocks of wood, which are higher in the treble than in the bass, and they're covered with a thick layer of chamois leather.
Dans l'instrument que nous avions à la disposition, 1783 de Suisse, les repos des marteaux sont faits par des petites pyramides sur lesquelles est collé un rond en tissu, en laine, en étoffe de laine.
So in the 1783 that was the basis for the study, the hammer rests were a little pyramid of cloth glued in a slit in the hammer rest, the wooden hammer rest.
En comparant tous les instruments, on peut voir qu'à chaque fois que Stein fait, dans les instruments qu'on connaît bien sûr, à chaque fois que Stein utilise des têtes rondes, il utilise des pyramides en bois recouvertes de peau chamoisée et dont la hauteur est très différente entre les basses et les aigus. C'est presque le double de hauteur.
So in the other instruments that were studied that have hollow hammerheads, you can see that the blocks, the rest blocks, were very, very different in height between bass and treble. In fact, they're just about the double of the height in the treble, and with this thick layer of oil-tanned chamois leather, or deer leather.
Et tous les instruments que l'on connaît, la garniture de ces deux des blocs, lorsque Stein utilise de la laine, n'est jamais original.
So in all the instruments that were studied, where the hammer rest material is woolen cloth, these woolen cloths were not original.
Donc on en a discuté beaucoup, bien sûr, de savoir est-ce que ces repos de marteau sur l'instrument de 83 en notre possession étaient originales ou pas, ou est-ce qu'on pouvait partir dans l'inconnu avec des garnitures dont on n'a absolument aucune trace.
So the big discussion point was whether the type of hammer rest in the 1783 that Mathieu was copying mainly were original. It seemed not, and what was there in the first place, and that was sort of a bit of a leap in the dark.
Donc c'est important parce que on pense toujours que dans les aigus, on a toujours envie que le son soit plus important que dans les graves. Et il peut paraître contraire au naturel de mettre le marteau beaucoup plus haut dans les aigus que dans les graves et diminuer d'autant la course.
So, of course, as builders, we always want the treble to be very strong. So it seems kind of a counterintuitive to have the hammers actually a lot closer and with a less travel in the treble than in the bass, but actually it was so.
Et là, c'est l'intérêt de la copie. On a donc décidé d'opter pour des repos de marteau en pyramide avec des couvertures de peau chamoisée dont on peut comparer vraiment de façon très précise les différentes hauteurs, quitte à un jour changer ces repos s'il s'avère que nous nous étions trompés.
So this is the big advantage of making a copy, is that you can actually decide what you're going to do. And in this case, Mathieu made a comparison of all the very high hammer rests with oil-tanned leather, and opted for that rather than copying what was actually seen in the instrument with its woolen loops.
Pour la poésie, c'est les photos au microscope électronique des têtes de marteau qui nous ont été données par Trondheim.
So this is what the wood of the hammerheads that was it's a micro taken by electron microscope, and this is the wood of the hammerheads which the museum in Trondheim very kindly provided.
Là, je vais essayer d'expliquer je vais expliquer tout simplement le choix de la garniture des marteaux.
So actually for the hammer coverings,
quand on compare tous les instruments que l'on a étudiés,
so if you compare all the instruments that were studied,
on voit que dans les basses, généralement, il y a 2 épaisseurs de peau.
so in the bass there's usually 2 thicknesses of leather.
Ceci approximativement sur 2 octaves.
So about 2 octaves.
Et qu'ensuite, il y a une épaisseur de peau.
After that, it's just one.
Étonnamment, l'épaisseur de peau du dessus, qui est à peu près la même du premier fa jusqu'au dernier fa.
So the outer covering, so the voicing covering, is pretty much the same thickness right across the whole campus.
Et fait 1 mm d'épais, ce qui est très très peu.
And it's only 1 millimeter thick, which is actually pretty thin.
C'est compliqué, je ne l'expliquerai pas là, mais on a pu voir qu'en fait, Stein, sur ses instruments, peut-être sur d'autres, je ne sais pas, mais sur ses instruments, aurait utilisé de la peau tannée à l'huile, de la peau chamoisée.
So Stein seems to have used, in all the instruments that Mathieu studied, he seems to have used oil-tanned leather rather than vegetable-tanned leather.
Et c'est très différent des peaux au tannage végétal. C'est absolument, on sait par avance que le son rendu sera absolument pas le même.
So the oil-tanned leather gives a completely different sound to vegetable-tanned leather.
Heureusement, on a pu trouver à côté de Munich.
So actually quite close to Munich.
Un gerberail,
So there's a tannery.
Tannerie, Collèche, gerberail.
Collèche, Gerberei.
Qui utilise des techniques anciennes de tannage.
We're still using 18th century techniques for tanning.
Et on a utilisé leur peau pour ces 2 instruments.
And it's leather from them that were used for the 2 copies here.
Voilà. Donc après plus simple des choses, c'est le rapport entre ces deux instruments, c'est ce que vous entendez maintenant.
So the most interesting thing is the comparison of the sound of the two pianos here.
Et en fait, quand j'ai mis les pots, j'ai eu très très peur,
So when Mathieu put the leather on, he was really scared.
parce que je trouvais que l'instrument n'était pas très incisif
So he felt the instrument didn't really have a kind of a bite to it
par rapport à ce qu'on entend des instruments 18e d'habitude.
compared to other instruments from 18th century instruments that we used to hearing.
Et en fait, les deux instruments, vous allez entendre, ont un son qui est très différent. Et je pense que c'est juste, dans le détail, ça peut être des différences de construction, mais dans l'ensemble, c'est juste parce que j'ai utilisé deux pots tannés à l'huile légèrement différentes.
So for each instrument, Mathieu used different skin, oil-tanned skin, and it's that probably explains the difference in sound between them.
Pendant que je vais juste expliquer la couleur rouge, je peux peut-être demander à Jovanka de venir vous faire entendre les deux couleurs différentes.
So Jovanka is going to actually just show the difference in sound between the two pianos.
Pendant qu'elle s'installe et pour finir, la couleur rouge,
So the red color on the insides,
cette couleur, on l'a retrouvée dans 3 instruments de Stein.
so found in 3 Stein instruments,
L'instrument qui est en Suisse,
in the one in Switzerland,
l'instrument qui est à Trondheim en Norvège,
in Trondheim in Norway,
et le vis-à-vis de Naples, mais ce rouge a été enlevé et on trouve juste des petits points de rouge dans les endroits où il est très difficile d'aller enlever les finitions anciennes.
So in the Naples vis-a-vis, most of it had been scraped away, but in the difficult to get at places, the red was still there.
Et en fait, j'étais au départ parti sur l'idée d'une teinte dans le bois, une teinte à l'eau comme on fait d'habitude.
So Mathieu's first idea was to actually stain the wood, as people usually do.
Mais j'ai vu dans les textes qu'il y avait il était très courant, en fait, au 18e et au début du 19e, d'utiliser des glacis pour la finition des objets en bois.
So, in fact, Mathieu looked at old treatises of the late 18th, early 19th century, and there it said it was actually very usual to use coloured glazes on the wood.
Donc c'est un peu comme un vitrail qu'on mettrait entre nous et l'objet.
So it's a little bit like a sort of stained glass window between you and the object.
Et l'effet va changer en fonction même de l'hygrométrie de la pièce, de la lumière que l'objet reçoit et même de la température, enfin de tout ce qui entoure notre vision.
So it actually is the aspect changes according to the humidity, to the light, to all sorts of the temperature, all sorts of things. So it's always a little bit different.
Et pour finir, on peut peut-être entendre juste vraiment quelques notes c'est pour entendre la différence. Merci beaucoup.
Vielen Dank, Mathieu, vielen Dank, liebe Silke, vielen Dank, Christopher, für diese spannende, vielen Dank, Michael, für diese Vorträge, die sehr ausführlich waren. Vielen, vielen herzlichen Dank. Ich würde vorschlagen, wenn Sie jetzt alle nach vorne kommen wollen, Mathieu, wir werden noch ein bisschen an Instrumenten etwas zeigen, da vor Ort, dass Sie auch wirklich an den Instrumenten sind. Eine Viertelstunde ungefähr und dann müssen wir schon wieder anfangen zu stimmen für die Nachmittagsprobe und das Abendkonzert und so weiter, dass das alles wieder in die Proben laufen kommt. Also bitte kommen Sie gerne nach vorne und stellen Sie auch Fragen dann im kleinen Kreis unter uns. Hier ist der Experte, Sie sind alle Experten, die Sie sich im Leben erträumen können, zu Instrumentenfragen. Bitte schön.